Evening and welcome to Face to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Shaliyatambi. Now, this morning, a very important event took place at the BMICH where representatives of 4 main candidates for the presidency held a debate. This was hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and this debate was on the economic policies of the 4 main candidates, and it was quite an eye-opener. It went for about 2 hours, and there were literally thousands of people who tuned in to watch. It was live streamed, especially on Newsfirst, on our social media channels, and it was also live streamed on other channels as well. So to discuss these matters of economic policy of the 4 candidates, we have with us 2 very special guests, Mr. Kesarralal Gunasekera, former Member of Parliament, and Mr. Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana, who is an economist, and he is now working with the People's Struggle Alliance. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kesarralal, let me begin with you. What did you think of today's debate?
Oh, it was good. I think, but I don't know. I wouldn't call it a debate per se, but they espouse their policies, etc., and there were questions posed to them, and they answered, and each representative was asked to ask the opposing or the other candidate a question which was answered. That was okay. It's in the good direction. I feel that the second round also should be held. I feel so.
When you say second round, are you speaking of another economic debate? Or,
yeah. Maybe other issues also combined.
Right. And it would be nice to have the 4 candidates themselves debating.
If they can get the 4 candidates, or else their representatives. It need not be the same representative. It could be somebody else. Maybe the other areas also can be accommodated.
Excellent. Dhanusha, what do you think of today's debate?
Niresh, well, actually lots of points. One would be that we got a really good idea about where the 4 main candidates are headed in terms of their economic policies. And so plenty of information were revealed so as to what they are planning to do with the IMF program, but I feel that some of the candidates lack the content required to actually give a proper picture about where they are headed if they are to assume power. But overall, I feel that the debate was giving out a good picture, whether it's good or bad, of where the candidates would be headed if they assume power once the elections are over.
Now, Dhanusha, we saw some of the differences of economic policy of the 4 candidates. Would you like to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think first maybe I should start with Harsha, because
yes,
Harsha,
if I may just break in, the representatives were the Honourable Harsha De Silva, Dr. Harsha De Silva, from the SJB, Member of Parliament, of course, and Honourable Minister Shehan Singha representing the President, and then we had Professor Ranjit Bandara representing the SLPP, and Harshana Surya Peruma representing the NPP, and all of them spoke quite eloquently.
Niresh, first of all, I think the approach of Minister Singha and the SJB representative Dr. Harsha De Silva were more or less the same. There was very little difference in the general approach. Apart from there were differences in some of the content that was proposed, but in general they were like completely driven by market mechanism type of thinking, and sticking to the IMF program as it is, and more or less, I mean, to go even further, Dr. Harsha De Silva more or less congratulated the current administration for sticking with the IMF program as it is, and completing, I think now it's about 75% of the conditions have been met, and that their views were mostly, obviously the debate was about the economic policy, so taking forward the IMF program, and in the middle of that they were trying to tweak some of the transfers or shift more transfers into handouts into the people that are deprived in their view. So the position of the SJB and the Ranil Wickramasinghe faction that was represented by the minister Semasinghe seems to be more or less the same. You don't see any difference in their approach, and I think Minister Semasinghe also spoke about exports growth and so on. Trade will more or less the same, the difference in terminology only, because Harsha was speaking about the dominance of the non-tradable sector and that the need to increase tradables. Now we have heard this story before, but as our late Professor S.B. De Silva mentions, he brings out this very clear example or very imaginative picture to criticize this tradable non-tradable idea. Now his position was that, okay, so you're saying you need to expand the tradables. Now we need to look at what are the existing tradables in the economy. So as we see, there are garments dominated by tea, garments and so on, rubber and so on. So for instance, let's imagine our entire economy is converted into plantations. Then what would happen is that, of course, our foreign exchange earnings may increase significantly, but our entire workforce, or roughly 95% of the workforce, will be transformed into tea pluckers, where they pluck tea with 2 fingers. For the last 200 years they have been doing this. There is absolutely no transformation between the capital and labor relationship and the absorption of scientific insights into the production process. This is where we see the economies have transferred right throughout the history. This is the common factor denominator in any economy, whichever the political form the country has assumed. But it is where the scientific advancements have linked up with the particular mode of production, so that the surplus generation process is symbiotically linked with the expansion of thought and your imagination, scientific advancement. But this is where that particular dynamic is mostly absent in our tradable sector. So when Dr. Harsha De Silva says, no, we need to expand our tradable sector, you need to think again. We need to think again about these dogmatic ideas and see more deeply our root causes of the root causes or the fundamental issues, the structural issues which we currently face. I think from there I would like to move on to how I think the talk of the town is the IMF program, and where our candidates how they see the IMF program and how they are once they assume power, and if they assume power.
What did you think of the NPP representatives' view on the IMF program?
Yes, so NPP was very much critical of the position which Dr. Harsha De Silva and Minister Semasinghe brought out, where they were fully in line with the IMF program, and they are saying, for instance, Harsha was saying that we need to that he hopes that by 21st, before the presidential elections, that this foreign debt negotiations will be over and the deal will be finalized. So that means to say that he completely endorses the current agreement which the government and the creditors or the owners of the ISBs have entered into. Right now it is being discussed by the OCC, or the Official Credit Committee, that is the bilateral committee, and also the IMF. So the OCC has to give its approval, saying that it is comparable, the treatment. So he hopes that the current arrangement will be approved, indicating that he is in full agreement with it. Whereas NPP position was that they want to renegotiate, they want to do their own debt sustainability analysis and want to sort of come up with their own debt parameters. Now the debt parameters have two sides to it, Niresh. One is that the directly parameters that are directly related with our debt numbers, like for instance the debt to GDP ratio of 95%, which the IMF has proposed, and the gross financing needs to be somewhere around 13% according to the IMF, which is around close to 30% in 2022. I think that has come down, but that needs to be 13% according to IMF. So those are the two key parameters. And there are other revenue side parameters, for instance, like the government revenue must be around 15.4% by 2027, and we need to have a what you call a primary surplus of 2.4% in about 2-3 years, 2.4% of the GDP. So these are the other supporting parameters which centered around the debt parameters. So what NPP is saying, they want to come up with a debt sustainability analysis that would revise the debt parameters which are set by the IMF. Because
were you surprised that the NPP hasn't completed their analysis and come up with concrete proposals?
Yes, especially because I think they seems to show the fact that they are backed by a massive intelligentsia supported by Sri Lankans working abroad, professors, lecturers, and so on. So I think by this time you should, technically they should be having a very comprehensive analysis about the situation, and should be able to come up with the numbers, and should be able to say, look, these are the proposals that we are going to have base our discussions with the IMF when you are planning to renegotiate. Because, these things are of course possible. We're looking at the examples from other countries. There are so many examples where when the IMF itself was involved, that the countries have been able to get much larger haircuts, from Greece to countries in Africa and into Latin America. So that shows that the intentions of the government matters when it comes to discussion. So that is what it shows. So the only thing that is different in our context is the difference between the governments. Of course, all those countries that I spoke about earlier have also faced similar situations. Whereas what is the credible or logical answer to a question if somebody asks, okay, why haven't we got a significant haircut? Now, for instance, Niresh, if we look at the debt program which the government has agreed with the foreigners, creditors, in fact, our debt has increased by about 20%. End of the day, so we have got 8 more years to pay that. So if they
have simply kicked it down the road a few years.
Absolutely, and on top of that, we have about 2.7 billion in addition to what we were supposed to pay. So that's a huge burden, and especially considering the fact that by 2028, if we reach 96 billion in GDP, which we will definitely achieve, that again is based on a false premise or false condition of assessing a country's national income. You cannot really assess a country's capability to pay their debt by just valuing the national income or converting the nominal GDP through our Sri Lankan currency into dollars, and assume the fact that okay, this reflects the capacity to pay. I'll get back to that point later.
A lot of issues have come up in this debate, obviously, which economists will be sifting through and critiquing. Kesarralal, were you a little surprised at the somewhat underpreparedness of some of the parties?
Well, the question is, Niresh, I feel as to whether they were given enough advance notice as to what would come up. It's just a debate. You could just come and prepare or come prepared to face.
But by now we are just 22 days away from the election. So by now they should have got all their, not just their economic policies, but all other types of social, developmental, foreign policies. Everything should be set in stone now.
Correct. But then all those things come subsequently. You fight an election now. When you fight an election, you don't go into all those areas.
But your election is based on these positions. Because
that's fundamental. That's why you have a document. But thereafter, you will have many discussions, etc., as to how we move forward. You know, if you look at the manifestos of all governments and do a report card at the end of the term, you realize that most of them have not been achieved. Most of them, which I don't say is correct, but that is the situation. So, because once you start going, once you start moving forward, you will always have problems. But as what the NPP said, which I felt was okay, is that they still want to renegotiate.
Yeah.
I still felt that was okay, because even the IMF agrees that you can renegotiate. Now, there was this talk that you cannot negotiate on anything and you have to agree upon and then finalize. But then at the same time, the government itself is now saying that with regard to the income tax threshold, that has to be changed. So they say they can renegotiate and change, but not the others, which I felt was wrong.
Speaking of documents, the manifestos of the parties have come out now. So once again, everyone will be reading through them. The NPP manifesto was 233 pages long, and quite frankly, I haven't got past page 20 yet, so I'm not going to comment on it. And I wish they could all come up with a shorter version. Because I wonder how many of our 17 million voters are going to sit down and read through hundreds and hundreds of pages and understand.
They will always do a summarized version of this. That always happens with regard to an election manifesto. A summarized version will come subsequently. I feel so. All parties do that. All parties do that.
Kesarralal, now you were a member of parliament from the SLFP, and of course the SLFP as it stands has disintegrated, matters are before court and so on. But the SLPP, which was and is the successor perhaps to the SLFP, because it was born out of so many members leaving the SLFP and
a breakaway
group. What is your opinion of the SLPP's stance on the economy?
Well, the question is, if you look back, you realize that certain programs of the SLPP did work, but unfortunately they had a problem as well, because I felt that the foreign exchange management was worrying. I mean, that is the issue that ultimately surfaces at the end of the day. If you don't manage your foreign exchange properly, you are in trouble. At every time you try to borrow and to work, you still run into problems. Through the ISPs, you secured so much money, but the question is the ability to pay back. You know, once you hit the bankruptcy mode, you are in trouble. But fortunately for the oncoming president or the acting president, that was okay, because once you hit that button, all payments come to a grinding halt until you finalize all agreements. So far what has happened is there is a saving as far as the foreign exchange is concerned, because none of the payments are being made with regard to loans, interest, etc. And therefore you can manage your affairs. And with the restrictions placed by the central bank with regard to imports, you're okay. So I feel from day one after the bankruptcy, we were okay. Although many people are trying to say we were not okay. I don't think so. That's my view.
But do you feel that the SLPP has learnt the lessons with regard to the economy, or are they still not accepting the mistakes?
Niresh, the question is, I still feel that we don't have the proper politicians coming into the fray. You know, you need politicians who have conscience, who have integrity, ethics, common sense. All those factors are missing.
That's a tall order.
That's a tall order. And when those things are missing, you find it very difficult to move forward. If you look at the performance of the subsequent operation under Ranil Wickremesinghe, there has been corruption. There has been corruption, which is not a good sign at all. Which I'm really shocked. And even the VFS program was a shocker, as far as I'm concerned. That shouldn't have come into the picture. So these are areas where the SLPP did not manage properly. I feel, and there is another aspect. Niresh, I don't know whether Dhanusha will agree with me. Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe joining hands with the SLP to contest election, I think is a mistake. I don't know. Maybe I will be proved wrong, I don't know. Because it is that group that the country is against today. Even today, the country is against that group because they put this country into this situation. And if you join hands with that same group to run the balance time period, that was okay. It was a job well done by the President. But to take it beyond that and face election, I feel, with all my years of experience, I feel it's a mistake.
Dhanusha, getting back to the economic debate, certain comments were made about the SWAT. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, Niresh. Now, Dr. Harsha De Silva just very clearly stated that they want to continue the SWAT, which is a tax rebate system given out for exporters. That he would want to continue that scheme under their administration. But right now, IMF has come up with a very interesting document about how the whole process of SWAT and how it is actually currently functioning, and they want SWAT to be completely removed. So what they have shown very clearly, I have the document with me right now, they have said there's extraordinary amount of people who are eligible for this, who are made eligible into this process, but according to the current criteria, they cannot be eligible. They cannot be benefiting from the SWAT system because they haven't reevaluated their current financial performances. If they do so, there's a significant amount of beneficiaries who would not be any longer eligible for the for SWAT scheme. So what happens here is that an exporter, if you are importing and you are paying VAT for your imports, are eligible to get a tax refund from the government. So what the IMF is saying, this is right now is deteriorating the tax income of the government, and therefore this should be phased off, or this should be completely removed. So, and on top of that, it's not just the SWAT scheme per se. They are saying is that a large portion of the people who are registered under the SWAT system are unnecessarily benefiting because they no longer come under the criteria which would make them eligible for this beneficial tax system. So that is where, so we need to question who Harsha De Silva is actually representing, because now the IMF is saying here in this, there are two sides to IMF. I mean, it's a long story to comment on the IMF also, but if it stick to this particular point. So what here Harsha De Silva is saying is that we don't need to change anything about the SWAT as it currently stands. We stand by its current mode of functioning, and we are that under their administration they want to take it forward. But this is the complete opposite view which the IMF staff report is saying, because IMF staff reports go into many critical aspects, although when it comes to the policy matters they will take a completely neoliberal turn. there are staff writers who actually go into very critical analysis of how the relationship between the business elite and how that works and so on, or the government, an in-depth analysis. So they have taken a sample of the people who are eligible and looked into whether they are actually eligible according to the business practices they are right now engaging in.
According to the criteria.
According to the criteria, and they have found large majority of those people who are benefiting should not be eligible. And now Harsha De Silva is coming forward in an economic policy debate saying that our policy is to continue this. The report was published on the August 23rd. This SWAT report, it's not a long report, it's salient feature from the report, know whether I can find it right now, that right here. So so they are saying that the businesses, I mean, they are very strongly supporting this SWAT system, despite the fact that so much of people should not be eligible, right? And that it is eating into government revenue. When the SWAT is repealed, this mechanism will be dismantled and several thousand VAT taxpayers will be required to transition to usual taxable supply rules, paying and collecting the VAT with monetary settlement. But no, I can't find the exact sentence I was looking for. So what it says is that there is extraordinary amount of corruption going on here, benefiting a privileged few in the business community, which shouldn't be the case. So one thing I could say is IMF will not hold these things legally binding to implement their program. This is what we saw earlier also, because they said, look, there is a tremendous amount of tax evasion going on in this country and tremendous amount of tax concessions. Nothing was mentioned by Harsha De Silva, right? Because one major aspect was that tax concessions given amounts to close to 1 trillion rupees between 2022-2023. Government put out a report on March 31st saying that the total amount is 978 billion under the duress of the IMF program. This came out, and the IMF demanded that, you know, at least on paper they said you should phase off these concessions. But you know, when they want to approve the program, they did not make this legally binding. What the government did, they slammed the VAT of 18% and expanded the goods and services which comes under the VAT system. So they showed, okay, now our revenues. So they were fine. They didn't hold that removal of concessions legally. So the same thing applies here also. So what I'm saying is, here we have to see who Harsha is representing here, right? So, and on one hand, I just want to quickly comment. So this DSA, it's very easy for me to comment. I'm not trying to target Dr. Harsha De Silva, because since he had some content, it's very easy for me to comment about what he was saying. The other candidates didn't have much content. The comments are much more
so it's to the credit of Dr. Harsha De Silva that he seemed to be more prepared for the debate.
From his perspective, I'm trying to show how undemocratic these policies are. It's very easy to show because he went into the particular very specific the information of very specific kind, and how draconian those policies are if we actually go into this, if you dig deeper into it and analyze them. Because now, for instance, he approved the DSA program and he said that, oh my God, I wish that this thing is approved. But I think earlier also I have mentioned the fact that the World Bank in the 1990s had a very set criteria, very specific criteria. I can even show the writings that for the less developed countries, they had come up with a formula about the debt ratios which the countries should reach in order for them to have a stable, so-called stable economy. Now the IMF said if you are reaching 95% debt ratio in next 10 years, you'll be fine. This is a complete violation and distortion of these accepted debt or the particular parameters set by accepted international organizations, by economists. So the one key criteria is that your economy should have only 50% now in debt. Now let's face it, Niresh, now if you go to a bank, right, they will go through your entire balance sheet. how much you earn and whether you are capable of repaying the debt, right, before giving out a loan. Anything. So for instance, it's like a rule of thumb. Your annual income compared to the debt they are going to lend you should be less than 100% of your annual income. Compared to, see what happened to us. Our annual income of the government was about 10% of the GDP. They have a debt of 100%. So, but these international institutions and the creditors knowingly have been pushing debt into a particular borrower, knowing that this has completely gone through the roof, violated the accepted norms. That's one thing. So that I go into the idea of odious debt and whether...
Dhanusha, on that note, we will go in for a short commercial break and we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Face to Face. We are with Mr. Kesarralal Gunasekera and Mr. Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana, and we are discussing the economic policies of the four major candidates for the presidency. Following this debate which was held this morning between representatives of the four candidates. Now, Kesarralal, I was a little surprised watching the debate that nothing much was said about new thrust industries which would catapult Sri Lanka's economy forward. We had, for example, Dr. Harsha De Silva mentioning that we need something like 10% GDP growth for several years down the road. In order to bring this country around. But I expected all four candidates or representatives of the candidates to talk about new industries, but we seem to be still stuck with tea, tourism, apparel and the same old traditional industries.
Maybe because we are after a bankruptcy situation. Maybe.
But then isn't this the time to think of
correct. But
expansion?
then a lot of people have to get involved in those discussions, etc. It's not only one particular party. Everybody has to. I feel after the president's election, people need to come together. This country has a serious problem. No sooner an election is over, you are divided. What the hell is wrong with this country? I don't know. Get together, because this is a country. This is our country. You lose an election, you don't have to stay clear. No, get involved. So I feel that those discussions will have to come on stage. But as far as I'm concerned, as to why they did not come out with new programs of activity, I don't know. What their trust industries would be, I don't know. Maybe they have things in the pipeline, but those are things that will come subsequently. But first, fight an election. I think their concern is how to fight an election and win it.
But Kesarralal, now in past elections, it was a choice of candidate A or candidate B. And economic policy didn't really
matter so much.
Yeah, it didn't matter so much. It was just simply a matter of, is the government in power popular enough to win? If it's not, you elect the other person, the other party.
Yeah.
But this time, after the chaos of the economic debacle, which we suffered 2.5 years ago and has continued to this day, it's vital that the voters focus more on the economic policies. This cannot be left to the politicians, can it?
You're correct. That is why I feel many people have made up their mind as to what they're going to do. I feel so because when I speak to many people, I realize that they have changed completely. They have not told me exactly whom they're going to vote, but I feel that their thinking has changed a lot. That I see very clearly when I speak to people on the road. Even this morning when I went out and spoke to certain people, that I see very clearly. So the issue here is, Niresh, I feel in today's context, we have to understand that normally governments are voted out because people feel, look here, you people, you can't perform. I'm wondering as to what they're going to do this time, because there are three sets of candidates, three main, of course there are four main candidates, but three sets of candidates. What their plan in mind is, whether it is A, B or C. I feel that that's a decision that they'll take.
Do you feel that the major candidates are doing justice to this enormous responsibility which lies on their shoulders, which is before them? Or are they still going business as usual, just trying to win the election? Is there a sense of that this is a pivotal moment?
Niresh, I still feel, you know, we have this mindset in our politicians, this applies to practically everybody. They have this mindset that they have to be there to solve problems. They must be there to solve problems, otherwise problems will not get solved. I will tell you something. Whether Anurukumara Dissanayake is there or not, the country will go forward. Whether Sajith Premadasa is there or not, the country will go forward. Whether Namal Rajapaksa is there or not, the country will go forward. Whether Ranil Wickremesinghe is there or not, the country will still move forward. Very simple. Therefore, we all need to understand that when it's time to call it quits, for heaven's sake, call it quits and leave, because the others, there are so many down the line waiting to get in. And maybe those are youngsters as well. Give them a chance, give them an opportunity. Why is it that we feel that we are the only people? In fact, very recently I saw a program of a particular minister, I don't want to mention names. He said novices cannot run a country. Who says so? What about the experts who have run the country today? Where are we? He says novices cannot run this country. I know what he was referring to. But what has happened to the experts who ran this country? We became bankrupt. We became bankrupt.
Absolutely,
so,
and
these things have to change.
That's the main point that the voters have been trying to drill into the politicians.
I feel that when it's time to go, call it quits and go home. And then allow somebody else to come into the picture. And for heaven's sake, after election, don't fight on everything. Get together, like other countries. That's how we can move forward. There's no way we can move forward without that.
Dhanusha, you mentioned a particular phrase, odious debt.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I also want to listen to that.
And this is something which has come up from time to time in the past couple of years. Right. But it has not, in my opinion, it has not been investigated and discussed thoroughly. Would you like to tell our viewers something more about what is odious debt and why is it so relevant to Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think, Niresh, one thing is that the idea has been very much used by many number of countries, and we have so many examples where the idea has been used to argue for a greater haircut or a greater reduction of their foreign liabilities. Governments, well, the idea of odious debt has two key criteria. One is the fact that a particular government has borrowed, if there is clear evidence that a particular government has borrowed and used that funds not for the benefit of the public, and if that is the case, and if there is clear evidence of that, and that public should not be burdened to repay that debt, because that amount of funds has not been gone into their advancing their lives. So maybe it has gone into someone else's pockets or advancing particular group of people's lives. So if that is the case, even under capitalist principles, if you take it, if you borrow, you are supposed to pay, right? So if a government borrows and the money goes into some other their own entertaining their own connections and not into the general benefit of the public, then even within that principle of a simple principle, how can you burden a public, end of the day, burden the public on paying such a debt? That is one thing.
Now, if I may give an example, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Sri Lankan Airlines, which purchased some magnificent aircraft, Airbus A350s, which we had no need for at all, and later on, subsequently, Airbus industry admitted in court in Europe after a joint investigation by the FBI and Scotland Yard. The Airbus industry admitted that their company had actually bribed officials in several airlines in developing nations to buy these aircraft at exorbitant prices. And this matter, there was, I think, a fine was levied on Airbus industry, and all the documents were handed over to the investigators, and it was basically open and shut case where Europe and the United States were concerned. But very little has happened with regard to the perpetrators down here and in other countries. I think there were 5 or 6 other countries. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Sri Lankan Airlines continues to pay the debt for those aircraft.
Absolutely.
So this would be an example of odious debt.
Exactly. And I think I would like to link up with what the MPP candidate was saying. Now, he alluded to the fact that when he started his speech, look, our debt, the Auditor General Department put out the annual report. This is an annual report 2022 or 2023, that they reveal that out of the 8 trillion rupee project loans we have borrowed for the past 15 years, where the report said 67% of that is missing from the assets. So now that is clear evidence of the fact that, now mind you, all these are, given the fact that these are project loans, the World Bank, ADB were monitoring these things. They're supposed to monitor. They're supposed to be monitoring.
So they should have flagged this.
Absolutely, they should have flagged this. So it makes the case for odious debt even more stronger. This is what people like Professor Lee Bucket have said. They actually put out a journal article in 2007, published in the Duke Law Journal, about the odious debt concept and how a particular country could, what are the legal paths to pursue, which, I mean, if a country faces such a situation. So they are clearly mentioned, like for instance, you can use the US district court system, where there are clear provisions of treating debt as odious, given the fact that there are 2 conditions. One is that the creditor cannot deny the fact that these type of things are going on inside the government. For instance,
the creditor is aware.
The creditor must be aware, and creditor is aware that there is no credible evidence. The fact that the creditor is completely unaware, the fact that this particular government is misusing the funds. When it comes to Sri Lanka, that is the case. That is the case. For instance, now the other thing is for despotic governments, the use of debt to suppress a particular community. If a government has borrowed to suppress their own people, and that amounts to odious debt. For our clear instance is the suppressing of the Tamil community, the war and the humanitarian crisis that came out. And the UN was saying so much of Tamil people, civilians were killed, and that there were war crimes committed. And then the Sri Lanka government's own Paranagama report in 2014, Mahinda Rajapaksa commissioned it, came out and said, look, close to 10,000 people who surrendered to the army had disappeared. And likewise, So this is a government that is well known in the world to completely have zero regard for humanitarian concerns and human rights. So no creditor can say. So despite this fact, because when I was writing to newspapers in 2009, we were questioning the IMF and for instance the US Embassy. The United States plays a huge role in the decision making process of the IMF, because we went to the IMF in 2008 and 9 during when the period when this was happening, whether IMF has the mandate to actually sign a program with a government like that. So then they had no particular clear answer. But then look, while the international community and the creditors all aware of what the governments were doing, they're clearly lending to the this. So
Continue to lend.
But I'd
give
like
me 2
to
minutes, Niresh. I'll quickly finish, because how racially unjust this whole framework is. The fact that that entire Tamil community is now burdened to pay back that debt. It is not just the Sinhalese.
They
so
also
how
burden.
exactly now the money that was borrowed to suppress them and to take away their rights, and their people were killed, now they are being taxed to repay the cost of that debt.
Yes, but
So,
let's look at what the Auditor General's report. Basically, I'd like to pose this question to both of you. Okay, let's simplify it. The Auditor General says that $1 billion was borrowed for constructing this highway,
Right.
and then later on, when it was valued, it's not worth $1 billion. It's worth $500 million. So
Yeah, or
where's
even
the
Or even
other-
less. Or even less.
or less? But let's just this is
Yeah.
hypothetical,
Right.
although it happens all the time. But this is the scenario. Now, if you have $500 million missing, and quite clearly there is a paper trail, isn't there?
Absolutely.
All the contracts
There is.
which were signed,
There
the contractors,
Yeah.
the public officials, the ministers, the lenders, the creditors, it's all there, isn't it?
You-
And a creditor doesn't just hand over $1 billion, they monitor it all the way,
Absolutely.
and at the end of the project,
Yeah.
they issue a project report as well,
Yeah.
where they evaluate and say, well, we're satisfied with this project.
Yes.
So now,
What has happened?
the question I'd like to pose to both of you, Kesarralal first, what do we do about this? What can we do? Because now we owe trillions of rupees, but where's that money? We've only got perhaps
Portion of it.
half our money's worth. So in the
balance
meantime, we're paying the balance as well.
Yeah.
And that's just disappeared.
Yeah.
So what do we do about it, Kesarralal?
Well, the question is, you need to bring this up so that public is aware of that. That is number one. Number two, we need to get assistance from overseas, how we deal with types of, because we don't, I still feel we don't have the systems in place to deal with such corruption. And this has been going on for some time.
Is it a lack of systems, or is it a lack of willpower just among the politicians?
There is
everybody
definitely
else?
lack of willpower now, because no politician involved. I mean, just imagine, we had Aragalaya and the incumbent president, I'm sorry to say this, the acting president, many people expected him to do certain things with regard to practices of corruption, no, but nothing was touched. Why? At least touch on some. Nothing. Why? That's the approach. That's the approach of Sri Lankan politicians. That is why everybody says we need to change everything. So I still feel we should not stop this. This has to continue and keep on harping on the fact that corruption has to be investigated and they must be tried in a court of law. That is very essential.
And finally, we are running short of time. Finally, Dhanusha, how would you respond to that question? Given that whoever wins the election, whichever party, has to deal with it, has to repay the debts at some point, or come up with a mechanism for it, and at the same time every party is promising to wipe out corruption. So this is very much part of that whole scenario.
Correct.
Yeah, I think to be fair with the NPP candidate, they have absorbed some of the key concerns which are raised by the Sri Lanka's trade union movement, especially, and now also the People's Struggle Alliance have taken it as their official position, especially the ideas such as this odious debt and the need for a debt audit, which we didn't see anything of that sort from the two candidates of the government and also the SJB. They had nothing to say about that type of corruption, absolutely nothing. Even when the fact that when NPP candidate was actually the representative was raising this point about the citing the particular Auditor General's report, saying he said some 75% of the money is not reflected in the assets, so that he was saying we need to do first a debt audit. But mind you, and debt audit has been already done. The information is there, it's lying with the Treasury. Otherwise, the Auditor General's department cannot come up with such numbers.
Exactly.
It is already there. Information is already there lying. They just need to utilize that. So, to answer your question, Niresh, we have historical precedents, examples where countries have used this argument. So what happens in the negotiation table is the what we have seen, especially in the case of Argentina. I have read about this. In 2001, they came up with this argument. Look, all this debt the previous governments had borrowed had not gone into the public benefit. There's a tremendous amount of corruption into it, and you all have been pumping money into a government which is clearly mismanaging the funds. And you were clearly aware of this was going on, despite the fact that so you cannot be held not accountable for the particular predicament these countries are now facing. So based on that argument, there is so much of legal scope that can be pursued. But so what happens at the negotiation table, which we have seen, is that the creditors agree for a significant haircut. This is our history. So they
ultimately,
they are
pressurized.
So there are options.
They are pressured.
There are options.
Clearly, there are options.
And we should explore.
We should explore that.
Niresh, I think we should take this on. We have to take this on because we need to inform the public. Look here, this could be a sham because we need to fight and ensure what we are paying as the debt is what we really have got. Otherwise, we are not responsible. That is the message that has to go to the country.
And on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time, unfortunately, but we will be revisiting this particular aspect, odious debt, in future programs, definitely. My thanks to Mr. Kesarralal Gunasekera, former Member of Parliament, and
I must thank you for bringing him.
And Mr. Dhanusha Gihan Pathirana, economist, who is now working on the campaign of the People's Struggle Alliance, for your insightful comments. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
it was a pleasure.
Thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away. The news is coming up next. Have a good evening.